Hello everyone, it's me and welcome to my channel. And today we are going to be taking a closer look at the Mesozoic era. We have already discussed the Triassic period and its monsters in other videos. So click those cards if you want to learn more about the origins of the dinosaurs. But today is all about the Jurassic. Let's get into it. The Jurassic period lasted from about 201 to 145 million years ago. It followed the Triassic period and preceded the Cretaceous. The name Jurassic comes from the Jura Mountains, France, Switzerland, where rocks from this age were first studied. During the Jurassic, the supercontinent Pangaea was still breaking apart. At the beginning of the period, Pangaea split into two main landmasses, Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south. The Atlantic Ocean began forming in the Jurassic. Much of Europe was covered by shallow seas. The climate was warm and humid compared to today. For example, no polar ice caps existed in the Jurassic. Deserts from the Triassic shrank, replaced by lush forests. Now that you know the basics, it's time for some monster talk. Our first monster is Ankylosaurus. Ankylosaurus was a small sauropod, perhaps 9 meters long, so about half the length of Argentinosaurus. It lived in what is now North America and Europe. Sauropods like Ankylosaurus were mostly herbivorous, but they had longer necks than their close relatives, the titanosaurs. This allowed them to reach more food sources, but also made them more vulnerable to predation. Thus, many sauropods evolved armor, like the famous Stegosaurus or the spiky clubbed tail of Ankylosaurus. However, Ankylosaurus was very early in the evolution of sauropods. Its ancestors had been much smaller and more agile animals, and they kept these small and agile traits. They lacked the armor of later sauropods, making them less defensible against predators. Their front legs were very small, and their hind limbs were very long. This gave them an odd running gait, sort of like a kangaroo. However, they were too small to leap around like kangaroos. Instead, they were fast runners, capable of outrunning most predators. Unfortunately, that would not work against Ceratosaurus. Ceratosaurus was a large carnivore from the late Jurassic of North America. In total, 3 species of Ceratosaurus have been found. All were about 7 meters long and weighed around 635 kilograms. They were fast and deadly hunters, though not quite as big as the famous Tyrannosaurus rex. They had very sharp teeth for catching and tearing up prey. Their hands had 3 clawed fingers, and they may have used these to catch prey, similar to modern-day cheetahs. These claws were not retractable. Also, they had horns on top of their heads, and I don't mean little nubs, like the ones on a bison. No, they had tall, pointed horns. They weren't quite as big as the horns of a triceratops, but they were pretty gnarly. Some scientists believe they were used for fighting rival males, while others say they were used for attracting mates. The horns might have also been useful for defense against predators. Imagine getting gored in the side of the head by one of those bad boys. Ouch! Ceratosaurus was one of the top predators in the ecosystem, but it wasn't alone. The late Jurassic of North America was home to several large carnivores, such as the famous Allosaurus. Ceratosaurus would have had to compete with these animals for food. To make matters worse, another large carnivore, the aptly named Ghost of the Desert, was entering the scene. Carcharodontosaurus was one of the largest meat-eaters of its time. It lived in the Middle Jurassic of North Africa. It was about 10 meters long and weighed over 1,588 kilograms. That made it larger than the previously mentioned Ceratosaurus and almost as large as the mighty T-Rex. Carcharodontosaurus was related to the more famous C. Megalodon. However, there is some debate about how closely they are related. The exact classification of this creature is very complicated and has changed many times over the years. It was first discovered in 1924. But at the time, scientists couldn't tell whether it was a crocodilian or a dinosaur. This is because its skull was very similar to that of a crocodile. Today, it is classified as a theropod, but it was not a bird like the Velociraptor or Tyrannosaurus. It was more closely related to the Giganotosaurus, which was a huge carnivore from South America. Like other large carnivores, it was an apex predator, hunting other animals for food. It likely hunted herbivores such as Diplodocus and Camarasaurus, the latter of which was one of the largest dinosaurs of all time. It weighed nearly 17,000 kilograms. That's about as heavy as 3 adult hippos. This shows you how strong Carcharodontosaurus must have been to hunt such large prey. Speaking of sauropods, let's move our attention to one of the smallest members of this group. This is the miniature sauropod, the size of a giraffe. It lived in the early Jurassic of what is now Europe. At first glance, it looks like any other sauropod. However, upon closer inspection, you will notice its tiny stature. In total, 4 species of Brachiosaurus have been discovered. They vary in size from 6 to 18 meters long. This means that they were smaller than the truly gigantic sauropods, such as Argentinosaurus, but still much larger than other non-sauropod herbivores. They were primarily browsers, meaning they preferred to eat leaves from trees rather than plants on the ground. This was made possible by their long necks. Their legs were very sturdy, allowing them to support their large bodies. Their tails were also very long, sometimes up to 4 meters. Like other sauropods, they had very long periods of growth, perhaps growing up to 18 meters long in just 6 years. This is unheard of for any other animal. That's all for the monsters. Now it's time for the mini-beasts. During the Jurassic, flying reptiles known as pterosaurs reached their greatest diversity. They had wings formed by a membrane of skin that stretched between their body and their greatly elongated 4th finger. Some pterosaurs were tiny, only about the size of a crow. Others were gigantic, such as Quetzalcoatlus, which had a wingspan of nearly 12 meters. It was about as wide as a double-decker bus. Pterosaurs were mostly carnivorous, feeding on fish and other small animals. Some larger species were capable of carrying off large prey, such as baby dinosaurs. The oldest known pterosaur nests have been found in China. They are about 130 million years old. This is much older than previously thought. Scientists think that pterosaurs started laying eggs as early as the late Triassic, about 220 million years ago. The oldest eggs were laid by a type of pterosaur called Lagopton. The Jurassic saw the first appearance of true flowering plants. Although before the end of the period, they were still a relatively minor part of the flora. Conifers continued to dominate throughout the Mesozoic. In the early Jurassic, cycads and ginkgos were extremely common. By the late Jurassic, ferns were becoming more widespread. The earliest birds appeared in the late Jurassic. Bird evolution is hotly debated among scientists. Traditionally, birds were thought to have evolved from theropods, a group that includes the Tyrannosaurus rex and Velociraptor. However, recent evidence suggests that birds might have evolved from a different group of dinosaurs known as ornithischians. This group includes the famous Triceratops and Ankylosaurus. More research is needed to determine which hypothesis is correct. That's it for the Jurassic. Click here to keep learning about prehistoric monsters. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching.